If there was one word that you could use to describe our culture, what would it be? I would say busy, but stay tuned. Let's have this conversation today on the Happy Holy Hour.
Come on, you need a drink, partner. Expecting trouble? I'm always expecting trouble. What do you think you're smoking around here?
You're acting like a child.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Welcome to the Happy Holy Hour. I'm Tyler, and I'm here with Travis and Jared. And today we have the big question. What is one word that you would use to describe our culture? And why? I mentioned this in the pre-intro, but I would say busy. I know, like the past couple of weeks, guys, I mean, you can attest to this. We've been super busy with our schedules and our lives, and you guys are new dads, and I'm chilling, but I have a lot I'm doing. I mean, how have you guys been this week? I mean, talk to me. What's been going on in your lives?
Been busy.
Yeah, great word.
Yeah, no, it's been, I feel like between work, the baby, and everything else in between, grocery shopping and having to make dinner, and I think the word for this, or not the word, but the sentence for this week would be not enough hours in the day.
Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
What about you, Travis?
Yeah, no, that's, oh man, I had a late night last night with Clayton, one of our twins, who's the past week has all of a sudden decided it would be fun to get up multiple times a night for no reason. He's not hungry, doesn't need to change, just wants to play. So I was up like 10:30 till 11:30, 12 with him, and then my wife was with him from like 12 to 2. And then of course they were up at like 6. So there's been a lot of that, just parenting stuff. It's just a busy season. I work at a conference center and summer camp, and so summer camp is full throttle, working long hours, a lot of like extra like work ministry going on beyond your 8-hour work day in the early morning, evening, whatever. And then we were like fostering, so we had 3 babies. It's just been a very like tiring season right now, just trying to like push through. And I feel that like not enough hours in the day. Like that's how I feel, like I just can't keep up with it all. It's been a theme.
Yeah,
I guess.
I feel that. I've been working like I'm capped on the amount of hours I can work in a week, which is good. It helps me maintain like a work-life balance. But I'm also been doing like some side jobs. I've been working on a congressional campaign, doing like marketing for that and website stuff, and also just some other local nonprofits and companies have been like kind of contracting me, to just help them out with some things, which is fun. I enjoy doing that kind of stuff. So, but it's definitely busy. Like you said, Jared, there's not enough hours in the day. Get up early, go to work, come home, work on other things. Before you know it, it's time to go to bed, or in your case, time to take care of the baby all night. And man, it's crazy. But so like today, I want to give us a little bit of insight to, first of all, what the definition is of busy. Let's talk about that. I want to talk about whether or not we actually live in a busy age. In other words, is it more busy than before? And that's a hard thing to gauge. So we'll look at that in terms of work, hours worked, although we'll talk more about what else there is involved in that. And then we're going to talk about, should we as Christians be characterized as being busy? Is that a good thing? Some people can be really proud to say, oh, it's so busy. They almost make it a competition. Is that healthy? We'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk about how we can find rest and peace in this really fast-paced world, the environment that we live in. So before we get into any of that, busy. We all know kind of in the vernacular what busy is, but just to lay it out on the table, it's just simply this: the state or condition of having a lot to do. It's easy, to use it in a sentence, it's easy to get caught up in the busyness of life. Life, there's a lot to do in our responsibilities in our individual lives. So busyness. a lot to do. You guys were just talking about what you guys have been up to. How does your jobs contribute to like how busy you feel? Is your job kind of the main thing that kind of stresses you out in a way that makes you feel so busy, or is it mainly the things that are outside of your job that add to it? Obviously it's all going to contribute in a way, but where's that main source of just, man, I'm so busy?
I would say I don't think I can really pinpoint it to one specific thing. But I do know, like, a lot of the times when work starts to get overloaded with orders that we need to get done, that I guess causes stress in a way. But then when I come home, it's like, okay, I just worked a full work day. You know, I did this, and that while I was at work. Now I have to come home and I gotta cook, I gotta clean, I gotta bathe the baby, whatever. Like, and obviously Natalie is taking care of like most of that, but it still kind of like weighs over me. So I don't know. I can't say if it's like one thing or another that completely sums up where my source of busyness is, but I think it's a lot of little things that add up into this is what the work week looks like.
Yeah, somewhat same. We might touch on this a little later because we're going to talk a little bit about work and the history of work and the amount, answering the question, are we really more busy now than we have been in the past? And so I don't want to like jump the gun on that, but I would say it's both. I think work in itself, like in some ways you want to be busy, you want to be constructive and doing something while you're at work. The point of going to work is to work. There can be times, and I think it fluctuates, like summer camp for me, it's just like there's so much to do, and so there are times where you can almost feel overworked, like there's just so much to do, you can't get it done in the time you have allotted. But I think part of the problem for me is that I live where I work, and so and it depends on the type of job you have too. If you're more manual labor than versus information processing or something like that, you can maybe leave it at home at work more. But for me, it's hard to leave work at home. It can just follow you home. Like people are calling you, they're texting you, they're emailing you. It can be easy to like, well, I can just bring my laptop home with me and continue work. And so it's that not having a defined like whatever 9 to 5, whatever 8 to 5, whatever work day, and being like, this is work, this is home. And obviously there's busyness, and there can be and all of that at home, and I feel that too. But on top of that, I'm feeling that busyness of work carrying home. So not only am I dealing with the busyness of home life, and there is that legitimate feeling, I'm also dealing with the busyness of ministry and home life. But I think too, if you were to like work could be manageable sometimes. There are certain seasons that are more busier than others, but work could be manageable sometimes. But then you add on everything on top of that, and it just feels like you're continually doing. I think it's the commitments and engagements on top of work that sometimes make it almost feel overbearing. Yeah, if that makes sense.
No, for sure. And I think like that work-life balance is hard now, especially when you work in like information processing or other things where you can take work home with you. You almost feel like you can never disconnect, which can definitely contribute to that stress and that sense of busyness, because there is no clean cutoff saying I'm clocking out today.
And it's expected of you oftentimes now in the workplace. Like, what? You're going to turn your email off or not answer the phone when I call you when you're at home? I'm not saying that necessarily like where I work, but I know it's common. Like it's common now to have a more flexible work, but they also want you to be available 24/7, even in the middle of the night. Like, you know, they want to contact you. You're expected to respond even when you're at home. So
one of the sources of my busyness this past week, I'm actually really excited about this. By the time this episode comes out, the Happy Holy Hour should have our own brand new website, which is super cool. I mean, we're gonna have places where you can read written content, and you can have access to our content via podcast. So I'm really excited about that, and that's going to be a way for us to just get this ministry to expand out there. So I have confidence saying that by the time this is out, our website will be live, and that'll be thehappyholyhour.org. So if you're interested in learning more, feel free to visit. If you're watching on the live stream, it's probably still under construction, so just have mercy.
Have mercy.
But anyway, so it's really easy to, I think, gauge our busyness in terms of work. But as we're going to talk about later, there's more than just work that characterizes our schedules and what we do. I mean, Jared, like you mentioned, there's coming home from work, cooking dinner, taking care of the baby. And I mean, when you guys, when your kids are older, you know, I imagine that there might be sports involved, or there might be music lessons or something where, you know, during the week, you guys are going to, including me at some point in my life, hopefully, you know, you're going to have kids that are going to be involved in things extracurricularly and be involved in different things. So the busyness, I feel like, is just going to keep increasing. But how do we survive that? And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later in our episode, and whether or not that's even really a good thing. But I found some stats, guys, really interesting stuff from lovemoney.com. And it's just looking at history and looking at some of the professions throughout like ancient times up to now, looking at the amount of hours worked in the day and how that calculates out to hours worked in the year. So before we get into it, if you guys had to take a guess before looking at the stats, would you say that now is more busy than in the past? Like in terms of work hours, would you say we work more now than those who worked 2,000 years ago, or worked less? Best guesses.
Is this what location is this? Like, is this worldwide, or is this like national?
Yeah, think worldwide. Yeah.
Okay.
I would say it's about the same. Fact, like, and I'll be honest, I did look at the stats, but even before that, I factored in a couple things, depending on how you define things.
Yeah.
I would say about the same.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
we can go into why that is later. But
I'm just going to oppose and say I think we're busier.
Yeah.
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 I want to clarify. I think we're busier. I don't think we work more.
Okay.
Necessarily.
Yeah.
That's how I would say.
Well, let's take a look at the stats, guys. And there's quite a few here, so just try to pay attention. I'll try to make these really simple. So we're going to start as far back as what I can find. Ancient hunter-gatherers, the most primitive form of making it in the day. From what I could find, according to this resource, they worked 3 to 5 hours a day, every single day. Which, you know, they went out, they found the animal that they would kill or the berries that they would collect, and they would go out, hunt, gather, bring it back, and that's how they would survive. Every day, that calculates to about 1,800 hours a year, 1,825. Little more recent, ancient Egyptian laborers. They worked 8 hours a day, kind of similar to what we do. They worked 131 days in the year, totaling to just over 1,000 hours a year. So that's less than even the hunter-gatherers, which is interesting to me. Look at ancient Israel. This is around the time of Jesus, somewhere in that realm. They worked 8 hours a day, but almost 300 days a year, which totaled to almost 2,400 hours in a year. A little more recent, let's look at medieval England. So between the years 1100 and 1300, 1400, they worked 8 hours a day, just like we do. This is an interesting trend that we find. But they worked 150 days in a year, which calculates to about 1,200 hours a year. Now, this is interesting because it looks like it's going down. We went from 1,800 down to like 1,100, back up to 2,400, now down to 1,200. Now, given these are all different professions, so keep that in mind. But let's look at 17th century French labor. So 1600s, those who are working in just the labor industry in France, 10-hour days. So these are a little longer days, 185 days a year. So total to about 1,850. So we're climbing now. We're climbing. We're seeing the Industrial Revolution come along. We're seeing the Great Awakening. We're seeing there's a lot of things that are happening at this point in history. So we're moving into the 1700s. Just an unskilled laborer in Europe. They were working 11-hour days, 208 days a year, which totaled to almost 2,300 hours a year. So we're climbing. This is, I think we see the climax here. 19th century England, if you worked in a factory, 16-hour days, 311 days a year, totaling to about 5,000 hours a year. Holy smokes, that's a ton. And what we find is that this is soon after this, labor laws are introduced and unions and stuff like that. They're starting to come on the scene. So now let's look at the United States and America, 20th century American factory workers. This is 1900s, within the last 100 years. We're seeing 8-hour work days, 243 days a year, totaling to just about 1,900 hours a year. And then now your standard 21st century office worker, this includes me, 8 hours a day, 239 days, about 1,912 hours. Now let's compare this real quick to where we had started. Ancient hunter-gatherers. Their total hours worked a year, 1,825. Current American office worker, 1,912. We're seeing that they're about the same. Now, given there's a lot of factors that play into this, overtime, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot. But relatively speaking, if we're trying to make a generalization, we are working about the same amount of hours yearly as people throughout history. I mean, averaging back to the beginning of like hunter-gatherer kind of lifestyle. So this is really interesting. What are your guys' thoughts on this? We're working about the same amount of hours as those working hunter-gatherers.
I would say that there are only so many hours in the day.
Yep.
I think to some of the statistics, depending on the career path, I guess, like laborer versus office worker, like I work 12-hour days, 5 days a week. Whereas someone might work, 8 hours, 8-hour days, for 4 days a week, something like that. So I think there are a lot of different factors, like you said, that kind of change that statistic a little bit, but nonetheless, it all is relatively close.
Yeah.
I guess it kind of comes down to like how many hours can a human go working and not die.
I think too, some of it's not so much just a amount or the quantity, but like what does it look like as we're at work? And that's what I wanted to get into, because now I think a lot of times we're seeing like we're able to multitask. We do multitask more when we're at work and at home. So you're seeing a lot more like while you're at work, you're doing more things than just at work, or at least a lot of people are able to, either listening to stuff or working on home stuff at work and then work stuff at home. And so you're seeing a mix of things where I think that would be a lot harder to do. I think you also have to factor in there's like commuting hours. There's all these other things too that are going on. And then I just wonder too, like, is it like how much information we're processing while we're at work? Like, I don't know. I miss doing manual labor. I do. Even though I worked longer hours and physically felt more exhausted, although I don't know if that's necessarily true. Like, it's amazing how physically exhausted I can be working a desk job. There's a lot of like studies out there that show how it's one of the worst things for you. But I had a better feeling about what I had accomplished when I did manual labor. And even though I was tired, I wasn't as mentally tired. Like when I like send out 100 emails or whatever, like it's just exhausting because you're like, sometimes it's repetitive, but sometimes too, it's just like you're in contact with so many people. You have so many, there's a lot of times I have so many details to keep track of rather than like focusing on like one thing and getting a job done. It's many little jobs, like, again, it's just that amount that you're trying to process. And I wonder if that's really healthy or adds to the feeling of busyness, because it's such a fast paced, like world with so many details going on, and you're trying to focus on many different things, sometimes not even work stuff, but home stuff. And, and then at home, you're also distracted. So I think there's a lot of that distraction, trying to multitask, the amount of information overload. I think that factors into this feeling of
I think
busyness.
That if I had to put something to it, I mean, I definitely think that our culture feels more busy. However, like if you really think about it, if you eliminated everything else that you were doing, so you go to work, you do your job, and you come home, you probably would be less stressed out. I mean, if there wasn't kids to take care of, If they're, if you didn't have to take your kid to soccer practice, if you didn't have to go to choir practice, if you didn't have to I think we busy ourselves up extracurricularly, after work, before work, whatever it is. I think we add a lot to our schedules, like sports. I mean, even podcasting, we know this is busy, different events that we do, different things that we're a part of. I think that we add a lot to our schedules, which makes it a lot more busy than it is. And I know, like, for young people, you guys might disagree, but like growing up, we were always told, like, okay, you got to add this to your resume, do this so you can get a good job. So you got to do these amount of service hours in college so you can do this and do that and the other thing. So you add a lot, and it almost becomes a mental thing where you're like, you just think yourself into busyness. You think about how much you have to do. You think about how much responsibility that you have, and you can think yourself into abysmal where it's like, I'm so busy, even though you might not actually be. Like, when you look at the hours in the day, you might not be as busy as what you think you are, because you have been conditioned to think about your schedule being as busier than it might actually be. But it's really interesting. I mean, I know that I think about my day in terms of chunks of time. So like I work about 10 to 12 hours in a day. So I do that. I sleep for about 8, and then whatever else there is, it's driving, or, how do I manage that other time that I have? And a lot of times it's like, I got to do this thing for church, or I got to do this thing for this nonprofit I'm working with, or this campaign. So it does get to the point where it's mentally and emotionally, I think through my schedule, and I'm overwhelmed with this sense of busyness. And I put it on myself most of the time, because no one's forcing me to do these extracurricular things.
Right.
It's something that we put on ourselves. It's interesting. I mean, some of these things can be super good, though. I mean, this podcast makes me enjoy the week-to-week grind a little bit more. You know what I mean? There's something that I can put my emotional and physical energy into to not only make my week a little better, but, I'd like to think that this podcast sort of makes the world a better place. It helps Christians learn things they might not have known beforehand, or grow in ways they didn't think they would. But so the things that we add might help us, but we have to find that balance. I think it's so hard.
I think one of the big problems that, like, I have, and I'm sure some of you guys do too, you might not, I don't know, but is we kind of transition busy into hurry.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And our mind begins to hurry on everything that needs to get done, and we're trying to rush through everything, and then that's when we get burned out.
Yeah.
There's a podcast that I listen to called Dad Tired, and they have an episode actually kind of similar to what we're talking about, and it's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And it's a really solid episode if you ever get a chance to listen to it. But they basically talk about, like, how the industrial America has become this hurrying mentality, and we're not taking back any moments to just breathe and take a rest.
Well, and the way we've been conditioned too, I mean, in the American work ethic, time is money. And if you can get more done in less amount of time, that's more profit. So, I mean, when you think about time in terms of capitalism, time does become money, and busyness does become profit. So it's interesting to think about it in that way. That actually reminds me of a study. So I studied sociology in college, and people call me a lot of names for that. But so Max Weber he was kind of like one of the fathers of sociology. And he wrote a book after studying this kind of stuff. He wrote a book called The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. He noticed that Protestants are making vast amounts of money. This is in the 1800s, late 1800s. And he was like, why are Protestants, how in the world are they so well off right now financially? Why are they so busy? What are they doing? So he went to study this, and just like, what's the difference between what Protestants are doing, what Catholics are doing, different religions, atheists, agnostics. And he discovered this belief up there. I mean, he didn't found the belief, but he kind of discovered that this is why. And I would consider this kind of heretical, actually very heretical. But essentially, the Protestants at the time thought that if you worked really hard and you made a lot of money, that God was favorable towards you. So what you did, how much you did, how much money you made was a precursor to what God felt towards you. I see this as a precursor to the prosperity gospel. So this idea that if you work really hard and made a lot of money, that God would be favorable towards you. I mean, what? That's definitely a precursor to the prosperity gospel, because they kind of have the same kind of beliefs. But people worked crazy hours to make a lot of money, to profit, to in a way secure their salvation and find favor with God. And it's just really interesting to me that in the Protestant mindset, this was something that was ingrained into their heads as recent as 150 years ago. And I wonder how much of that just like subconsciously has made its way down to us. Right. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. I wonder too. And I did once I saw your research in there, I didn't read the book, but I did like a little research into his findings and everything. And I found it. And this is what some of the critics say, it's a little simplistic. Yeah. Now, I do agree with some of his findings and his like theory. But I wonder too, because I can totally see how that could be the case. And I wasn't around back then. Yeah. But I also know that like, kind of not as a playing the devil's advocate, but I know there was also a strong work ethic because like for the Puritans, for example, they believed like there was a lot of belief in your vocation and calling and calling to work and working with excellence and God's providential care and that being a part of it. And so that was ingrained into them as a positive thing. So I wonder too, like I can see how some of them could use it as a negative thing. Although I wonder like if their thinking really was the more I work, the more I have, the more favor I have. Therefore, I know I'm elect, so they use their wealth as a way of salvation security. I can see how that could be the case. I don't know how widespread it was. But, I mean, he was around back then. Maybe I don't know how extensive his research was or his
research was mainly focused on the American Northeast, like the Mid-Atlantic into New England. So kind of like Philadelphia, New York, Boston, that area, which the Puritans were in that area. So, I mean, it's interesting because what you said about the Puritan work ethic is 100% true. And in a way, like that, we, as a Christian, you should work really hard at whatever you're doing. You should pour yourself into it because not only, I mean, it's what you're called to be doing. You want to make sure you're doing that with all of your heart, soul, and strength. But there was this twisting of that mindset that a lot of people had, and I think they still have today, where, if I make a lot of money, that is just evidence of my salvation. That shows that I am in the elect. That's just evidence of it. That's what it was. Yeah. That was one thing.
Yeah, which is interesting because I don't run into that now. What you see with the prosperity now is really they twisted it farther, and now it's almost twisted it around. So I don't know. Maybe it was from what I tend to take a little bit more of a positive light on that, and where I think there's a lot of research that I've listened to where like it talks about the same thing, how the Protestant work ethic led to all this economic wealth and success, and some of it could have been negatively motivated, like you said, to prove, wow, that this is how I know I'm elect because if you have God's favor, you're elect. Therefore, if wealth is a sign of God's favor, I can prove that I am saved. So I'm sure that could have been the case. I think there was also, though, this positive, and it should be, like we should outperform in a way. That doesn't mean we're busier, but, if we're working onto the Lord with excellence and we are good employees, and we're being generous there. I mean, there is a sense in where you do these things as a general principle, like God does bless you for that. It may not be in financial wealth, but as a general principle, if you're being wise with your money, if you're being a good steward, if you're being generous, if you're doing these things, normally that does help you out. And as a nation, if you're going to be applying those principles, it should. Now, that's not always the case. You look at, Job and different things where like, you could be doing all these things and God takes it all away from you.
Something I kind of want to like throw out there is that, yes, the Bible does say work as if you're working unto the Lord, do all things for his glory, and work hard. But in the Torah and in the ancient Israelite system, they had an expression that was Shabbat Shema. And what that translates to is rest and listen. Mm-hmm. And that was part of their framework of their culture, a part of their belief system, a part of their lives, was they would work hard for those 6 days. And then on the 7th day, they would stop everything and listen.
Yeah. And I think that's a good transition, because I know I kind of got on an interesting sidetrack, but bringing it back, just to summarize, like, work doesn't necessarily equate, or busyness doesn't necessarily equate work, or vice versa. Yeah. Right. And God has created us to work. So that's not a really bad thing. Like, to work is not bad. Right. To work is not necessarily to be busy. You can work and not be busy. Now, kind of transition, should Christians be characterized as busy? You know, and like kind of like wrestling with that, like God has called us, you know, you hear these phrases, endure, run the race, we're not to be idle. And so at the same, and we have, like you talked about, we've been conditioned to always be busy. And so now, like, to not necessarily be doing something, or to be working, or whatever, to have a full schedule, is characterized as being lazy. And is that necessarily the case? Like, I know, right, like some people, I look at their calendars, not being nosy, but like they have something like for every single day of the week, every single night, like every single night, they have, like, their kids are in 3 different locations. They have multiple sports going on. They're working. They have all these other commitments. Like, there's no downtime. There's no rest. And is that what God has called us to do? If we're not that way, are we being lazy and idle? Like, how do we wrestle through this as a Christian?
It's interesting. Like, well, first I want to preface this is work, having a job, you know, being able to work for the glory of God is a total gift. It's not something that we should view as something that's just taking away time. So I want to clarify that. Mm-hmm. Every job that you have is it's a gift, and whether or not it's a ministry job or like a workforce job, God has put you there for reasons that He has, you might not know yet. So don't discount what you're doing as something that's just taking up time. However, it is interesting. I mean, I think we create havoc in our lives most of the time. So, like, should Christians be characterized as being busy? If someone just looks at you and says you're a Christian, that equals busy, I would say that's probably not a great thing. I mean, we should be busy in the sense that we're doing kingdom work, you know, like,
and maybe it's a different, because we characterize busy and like a certain terms, and now we have, like, when you say busy, you have a preconception of what that means. So maybe like productive, right? Like, you know, like we should be productive and we should be doing things and not being characterized as being lazy. But if you're not busy, does that mean you're lazy? Like those type of things. So
it's interesting. Like I find myself doing this, and I got to bring myself back. I think of utilizing time. Like, obviously you want to be productive with your time. However, in the culture we live in, too many times does productive mean profitable in terms of money. Mm-hmm. And like, not everything that you're doing needs to be monetized. In fact, you know, not everything you're doing should be monetized. It takes the fun out of everything if that's what you're just trying to do. But Ray Lemos commented, Jerry, is this your brother?
Yeah.
He commented on our feed that says, as Mom would say, my riches and glory are with Christ Jesus. Like that. Amen. Like, that's so refreshing. When you're in that culture of busy, of constantly on the go, got to make every minute count, got to be productive with everything, doesn't necessarily mean that what you're producing is something that's going to give you monetary value. What you could be working on and what has real value is those riches, the glories that are with Christ Jesus, and the eternal rewards that come with, you know, being quote unquote busy for the sake of the kingdom. You know what I mean?
Well, I want to like look at the framework of how Jesus lived his life in Israel. He was constantly doing things. He was constantly going places and meeting people and traveling and fishing, and even before that, he was like a woods worker, a stonemason, all that kind of stuff. And he was always on the move, but at the same time, he would stop and he would sit under a tree and enjoy God's nature and talk to people and enjoy them and be with them. And so he was busy, for lack of better words, but at the same time, he would enjoy every moment that he was in because he knew that each of those moments came from God.
Yeah.
And he wasn't, like you said, he wasn't worried about money. It wasn't a monetary centrality. It was more of a, God will provide what I need. Look to the birds, Does the bird worry about where its next meal is going to come from?
Yeah. I mean, and that brings us to this great question that I think we need to answer. Does being busy always have to translate as being stressed? I think those two words become synonymous with one another too frequently. Like, I'm busy and that means I'm stressed, but can you be busy and not be stressed? And that's, like, for me, a challenge. I constantly look at more things to do as more stress to be had, but that probably shouldn't be the case. That we shouldn't be characterized as stressed and, as a result of being busy. That should not be the case, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, and I think again it comes down to like how you're defining terms. If busy now means a negative, like hyperactive kind of thing, then I think that will naturally lead to stress. If we're looking at busyness as it could be more just being productive than no. So
yeah,
I think again now if you use the word busy like in the way our culture uses the word busy, like yeah, you're going to be stressed, but kind of looking at it as a more positive, productive light, then no, not necessarily.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing to look at. And I've had this question in the past, and the question was just on Ask Pastor John with John Piper and Desiring God Ministries. But is it a waste of time to work in non-ministry jobs? The answer to that is absolutely not. It's not a waste of time. God has called you to be where you are. And, it could be really easy to look at, your life and say like, I have to be the most productive for God. That means working my full-time job in ministry. I mean, obviously God does call people to that, but that should never discount those who are faithful, who are working in the labor force, doing amazing ministry with the people at their positions. I mean, Jared, the conversations you talk to us about are just amazing. There are more conversations that you have with people at your work about God that I couldn't have those conversations at my work because everybody there's already believers. So like in a way, even though Jared's working in a full-time job that's not full-time vocational ministry, he's on the front lines. Like he's on the front lines of the kingdom. And it's super cool to look at it in that way. So like, just because you want to be effective for the kingdom doesn't necessarily mean to go get a job in full-time vocational ministry. So like we do have to think about these terms and how we utilize them as we define these things and talk about them. But
yeah, I mean, when last year, Tyler, Brad and I actually went to Chile. And when we came back, I was just like, I feel like I need to go into full-time ministry. I feel like I'm not being productive. I'm not doing anything for the Lord. And I'm just, sitting here day by day with my work and I'm making hitch baskets and that's it. And God just showed me through his word that like, he can use me wherever I am. It doesn't matter if I'm in full-time ministry or if I'm in full-time vocation of, technician, whatever. God can use you where you are. And that's why, like, I take full opportunity every time I have an opportunity to tell somebody about the kingdom of God and about Christ Jesus and the King and how they can become a part of that. And so, like, I would say to anyone who is out there and saying, like, I'm kind of stuck. I feel like I'm not doing anything for God and I'm just at my work. Take the opportunity. Do what Jesus did and sit back, enjoy the moment that you're in and tell people about the kingdom of heaven, where you are. Have boldness, but at the same time, be humble to God's word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like that was an awesome rabbit trail to get on because I feel like that needed to be said, like honestly. But like back to this whole busy and stressed thing, like I know people who are busy and stressed. In fact, most people that I know who are busy are stressed. But I also know a couple people that just stand out in my head who are busy, but they're totally stoked that they're doing what they're doing. Like they're not stressed at all. In fact, they look at it as like, this is amazing. Like, I'm so glad I get to do this. So I feel like it's a mindset thing as well. And I don't really know what else to say about that, but we should never really be busy to the point where we're neglectful of our families, our relationship, and our churches. Like, it's good to be busy in the, actively involved in ministries or groups or something like this. Just, you don't want to be neglectful of anything either,
Yeah. I think the problem a lot of people have, though, is when those things come in tension with each other. Like when you have all these commitments at your church and that's taken away from your family, or when you have all these commitments to your family and that's taken away from church, and then you add in work in there, and then like, how do you balance it all and what takes precedence? That's where I think you have a lot of the trouble. And some of that's just a wisdom thing. Some of that, and we don't have a lot of time, so maybe we can move into this. Like, how do you find rest and peace, and how do you balance those things? And I think, like you said, like going way back to what Jared said about the Israelites and how they worked hard, but then they had rest, and what you said about some of those people who who are busy and yet they're like excited about and how they can keep going and they're not worn out. Part of that, I think, is like God has given us ways to find rest and refreshment and peace and to be recharged, and so sometimes it's just, are you doing those things that God has sometimes commanded you to do, or as God has given you? Are you taking part in the means of grace? Are you taking that Sabbath? Are you worshiping as a family together? Are you worshiping as a congregation? Are you spending time meditating on the word? Are you spending time in prayer? That famous saying of Martin Luther where he's got all these things to do and people are like, how do you have time to pray? And he's like, I have so much to do. How do I not have time? Like, I have to pray. And he's spending 3 hours of prayer, and a lot of the success, you look through church history and you look at these great men of faith and all these things who have done so much for the Lord, and a lot of them have spent hours in prayer and hours in meditation on the word. And sometimes those things are the first things to go, and those are the things that we really need to be partaking of. It's like the studies now, the big companies that are cutting down their work hours because they're finding if you narrow down the work hours, people are more intentional with the fewer hours they have than if you give them a full work week. And sometimes it's the same thing. Sometimes we need to spend more time in the word, more time in prayer, more time with other believers, and that will refresh us and enable us to get more done. So there's that level of it. But I think there's also a practical level too. Right. We need to, sometimes it's just practical wisdom. There are things like getting a good night's rest. There's things like getting rid of the more toxic time wasters, like limiting your screen time and all those things. When you're finding like, oh man, I don't have enough hours in the day, take a practical look at, and I need to do this a lot of times, like how much time am I wasting? Like maybe it's not so much I have too much to do, but I'm wasting my time on other things. And if I got rid of those, I'd have enough time in my day. That's not always the case.
Dude,
so,
I think it's so easy to lose time on social media scrolling that you there's so much time that you have there that you don't even recognize. You don't even realize that you have it. Like when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you do, is it scroll for 20 minutes, or is it like, oh my goodness, there's probably so much time that can
and
be
it's
found.
So hard to we've said this, we did a social media episode and I said, well, don't look at your phone the first thing in the morning. Like all of a sudden I'm doing that. It's a thing you had to keep coming to. But yeah, if you put those guidelines, a lot of it's like putting guidelines on your life to limit those other things so that you have time for what's really important. So there's like a practical aspect of it. But there's also... Oh, go ahead, Jared.
I'm sorry. I'm going to use a button word here. Create rituals in your life. Because if you don't do things in repetition, you're going to fall off the track. At least that's how it is for me anyway. If I don't, read my Bible first thing in the morning every day, like if I even miss one day, it'll end up being 2 days, then 3 days, and I'll just fall off. So having those ritualistic
Like a
motives,
routine.
yeah, a routine, it'll help advance your mental health as well as your spiritual health.
Yeah.
Yeah, creating those good habits, like, you know, you're creating, like, we're worshiping on Sunday, we're doing family worship, we're spending time daily in prayer. So you're like doing those things, and it's getting rid of the bad habits, getting rid of the toxic time wasters. I also think, though, there's a time where you have to be sacrificial, and it's not getting rid of the bad for the good, but it's limiting the good for the best. You know, that's like, and we've had this conversation with my wife and I as we've having kids, and they're going to be growing up. Like, are we going to limit, like, these good things that our kids could be involved in for the sake of having family time, things like that? Like, we want them to be involved in sports. Is it really necessary for them to be involved in 3 sports at one time? Or, like, you think about how uncommon it is for families to have dinner together around the table. Like, I think that's an important time of actually rest and refreshment and connecting as a family. And so, like, I think that's important to us. And so we're going to try to say, and see you say now, but, like, you know what, we want to have dinner as a family. And so there are going to be times where we have to say no to things that aren't necessarily bad. But in order to do that, or in order to have family worship, or in order to, you know, be on at church on Sundays. So there comes a time when you have to be sacrificial and say, you know, I'm not going to commit to all these good things. Sometimes it's volunteering at different stuff. Like, that's not a bad thing, but when it takes away those God-given things, that can become an issue.
I think it's important too to remember the fact that when we talk about resting isn't doing nothing. Like, although that might be one thing you do to rest, like it might be take a nap or something like that. But, like, when we say rest, essentially what we're saying is refresh. So spend time in the Word, whether it's with yourself or with your family, or have times where you do both. Or, like, for me, one thing that I do to get refreshed is I love to take, so I intentionally will load more hours in the first half of my week of work so that I can take time off at the end of the week and go do something for me, like go take pictures or take a walk, something to battle my actual, like, chemical imbalance depression. Like, that helps reset me. That's restful to me.
Yeah.
Even though I go out and hike 5 miles, physically it might be exhausting, but mentally it puts me in the place that I need to be.
Right.
So yeah, that's something to think about.
It's like working out. Working out is, my wife got on me this the other day because I'm like, I always feel so exhausted. She's very dedicated about working out. It puts me to shame, and I'm like, I'm too tired to work out. She's like, well, you're the reason you're tired. Like, working out is actually, it's going to be hard, but it's actually going to make you feel better, and it's true. But it's the same thing about those other things. We're like, oh, I'm too busy to do this. The one thing I would say is that, like, if you don't get rid of the toxic time wasters and take that practical step first, when you go into this sacrificial step, then you're going to be cutting out, okay, we're not going to be involved in this sport, and so we're at home wasting time watching TV. So, like, if you don't replace that time you've opened up with something good and gotten rid of the bad, then you're just going to end up wasting that time again.
Right.
I don't know. It's interesting. We don't have a lot of time left, but, like, thinking as individuals, but even as churches, like, are we cultivating a culture of rest? Like you said, it doesn't mean doing nothing, but I think of, like, a lot of churches where, like, it's a culture of busyness, you know, and in our workplaces too. Like, is it just like we've got to do, or is it like, okay, like, these aren't bad things, but let's focus on, like, what God has given us as refreshment, and there is a balance there. Sometimes there's things that generally need to get done. So I don't know. There's not a lot of time to hash that out, but just think through those things as individuals, as churches, as businesses. But Jared, what's up?
I just have to say, in our last episode, we talked about pastoral conclusions.
And
I'm pretty sure I've heard you say 3 times now. We don't have a lot of time.
And then I keep going. I know.
In conclusion, to wrap things up.
Weird things Christians say. As we close, there we go. There it is. The last one.
There we are. No, I think we had a great conversation today, guys. And I think this is helpful for us to process in our own lives, as well as for other people to think about too. You know, questions, what is occupying your time? what is something that's toxic that's occupying your time? What can you add to make you feel refreshed? What can you take away? These are good things to routinely think about, I think. And today, I think we did a good job at trying to discover those things, at least in our lives, and how that would look. But awesome. This would be a good 2-part episode. Come back to this at a later time and give some more practical, like actual real world examples of what do we do to kill the time wasters and, build it up with things that are refreshing and stuff. That'd be cool. But anyway, all right. Well, if you're listening to this and you have any fun tips about, how do you build in your schedule times to relax? Like, what do you do? Let us know. We'd love to know, just, for our sake and to relate to the rest of our listeners. That'd be really cool. But remember to join us next week on the Happy Holy Hour. Come back to wherever you listen to your podcast. Remember to subscribe. Remember to like, comment, review, whatever it is that you want to do with our podcast, wherever it is. Help us cut through those algorithms a little bit. And we have
check out our website.
Yeah, check out our website, thehappyholyhour.org. We're excited about this, and there's going to be more fun and exciting announcements coming up that we're excited to relay on to you guys. So have a wonderful week. Remember to join us next week in the Happy Holy Hour.
Bye.